You see that little remote in your hand right now, the one sitting on your armrest, the one you've used 1,000 times without thinking. There's a button combination on it that the manufacturer never told you about, and what it unlocks could save you from buying a new television for the next 10 years. Inside every modern TV sits a hidden service menu, a second operating system. The engineers built it, the factory uses it, and the average American homeowner has no idea it exists. The Amish families I spent time with in Holmes County, Ohio, don't own televisions, but the man who taught me about this used to be one of those factory engineers before he walked away from all of it. By the end of this video, you'll know the exact code sequence documented in a 2003 Sony service bulletin that opens this hidden mode on almost any set made in the last 20 years. And no, you don't need to buy a new TV. This works on the one you already own, sitting in your living room right now. The first time I saw it happen was in a small repair shop just outside Millersburg. An old Mennonite man, sleeves rolled up, took a remote, pressed 4 buttons in sequence, and the screen flashed into something that looked like a green and white spreadsheet from 1985. He looked up at me and said, "This is where they hide everything they don't want you to see." I didn't believe him. I'd spent 32 years as the kind of man who paid for the extended warranty, who replaced the TV every 5 years because the colors looked faded, who trusted that when something stopped working the way it should, it was simply time to buy another one. That's what we were trained to believe. That's what the commercials told us. That's what the salesman at the electronics store confirmed with a sad nod every time. But what that old repairman showed me that afternoon changed how I look at every piece of electronics in my house. Here's what most people don't understand about the television sitting in their living room. From the factory, your TV is deliberately set up wrong. Not broken, not defective, wrong on purpose. The brightness is cranked too high. The contrast is pushed past what your eyes can comfortably process. The color temperature is set to a cold blue tint that looks impressive under the fluorescent lights of a Best Buy showroom but ruins the picture in your actual living room. There's a reason for this. A 2011 study from the University of California documented what they called showroom mode, where manufacturers calibrate sets to win the side-by-side comparison on the sales floor. The television that looks brightest wins. The one that looks most saturated wins. And the one that looks calmest, most natural, most accurate gets passed over by the shopper. So they all turn up the dials, every brand, every model, and those settings stay turned up the entire life of your TV, burning out the backlight twice as fast as it should, fading the panel, making the colors drift year after year until you decide it's time to throw it away and buy another one. But the service menu, that hidden second operating system, lets you reverse all of it. You can lower the backlight current, you can recalibrate the white balance, you can reset the color gamma to match what your eyes actually see in your home. And here's the part that the repairman told me with a grin: you can extend the life of that panel by years, sometimes more than a decade, by making those adjustments one time and never touching them again. Now, the entry codes vary by manufacturer. On most Samsung sets, you press mute, then 1, then 1, then 9, then enter, all in quick succession while the TV is on. On older Sony Bravia models, it's display, then channel up, then 5, then volume up, then power. On LG, you hold the menu button on the TV itself, not the remote, for about 7 seconds. On Vizio, it's a combination of menu and the directional pad that varies by year. When you enter the right sequence, the screen will flash, sometimes black, sometimes a strange grid of numbers and letters that looks like nothing you've ever seen on a television. Don't panic. Don't unplug it. You're inside. Once you're in, the first setting you want to find is labeled something like backlight current, LED current, or panel drive. From the factory, it's usually set somewhere between 180 and 220. Bring it down to 130 or 140. You won't notice the difference in brightness in a normal living room. But your panel will run cooler, the backlight will last twice as long, and the picture will actually look more natural to your eyes. The second setting to find is white balance, sometimes called color temperature offset. The factory sets this cold and blue around 9,300 Kelvin. Real daylight, the kind your eyes evolved to see by, is closer to 6,500 Kelvin. Find the warm setting or the D65 preset and select it. The picture will look slightly yellow for about 10 minutes while your brain adjusts. Then suddenly, everything looks the way it was supposed to look from the beginning. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people with brand new electronics, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. That TV in your living room, the one you've had for 6, 7, 10 years, the one where the colors started looking washed out and you assumed it was dying, it probably isn't dying. It's running on factory settings that have been slowly destroying it from the inside out. The same service menu exists on sets made as far back as 2002. The codes are different, but the principle is identical. You can walk over to that television right now, this weekend, with no contractor, no technician, no service call, and add 5 to 10 years of useful life to it. And while we're talking about extending the life of what you already own, what the engineer in Holmes County showed me was just one corner of a much larger archive. The full set of suppressed Amish and old trade formulas, the heating systems, the cooling tricks, the pantry preservation, the pest control. The off-grid wiring is collected in something called the Complete Field Vault. And there's a limited window right now where the full 3 volumes are being offered at a fraction of the normal price. The link is in the description, and there's a QR code on screen if you want to claim it before the window closes. Now let me show you the part of the service menu that almost nobody talks about. Because here's where the story gets darker. The same service menu that lets you fix your TV also contains a setting that almost nobody talks about. It's called burn-in time, or sometimes operational hours counter. It's the hidden odometer on your television. And what it reveals about why TVs fail when they do is something the industry has fought to keep buried. In 2008, an engineer named Robert Heron, who worked at one of the major panel manufacturers, gave a lecture at a small electronics conference in Las Vegas. He explained that modern televisions contain what he called a soft kill timer, a series of conditions programmed at the factory that gradually degrade picture quality after a certain number of operating hours. Not a hard failure, a slow decline, designed to make you believe the TV is wearing out naturally, when in fact it's being instructed to fade. The lecture was never officially recorded, the conference proceedings were never published, but the engineers in the room took notes. And the service menu on most televisions still contains the counter that triggers the degradation sequence. You can see how many hours your TV has been on. You can see exactly where it sits in the manufacturer's planned timeline. You can't always reset the counter. That part is sometimes locked. But you can see the truth of what they did to your television. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The Amish don't watch television. But the trade knowledge, they preserve the idea that anything built by human hands can be understood, repaired, and maintained by human hands applies to every piece of technology in your house. The old repairman in Millersburg said something to me that stuck. He said, "The company that sold it to you wants you to forget it's a machine. They want you to think it's magic, so when it breaks, you bow your head and buy another one." It is not magic. It is a machine. And every machine has a way in. Now here's what I promised you at the beginning. The secret finale, the piece of information I found buried in a Sony service bulletin from March of 2003, document number SB200300317, that almost no consumer has ever seen. Inside that bulletin, intended only for authorized repair technicians, there's a paragraph describing what Sony engineers called the universal access sequence. A combination of button presses, originally designed so that factory testers could open the service menu on any TV, regardless of model, without having to look up the specific code for each one. The sequence is this: with the TV on, press the display button, then press channel down, then press channel down again, then press volume up, then press volume up again, then press the power button on the remote not to turn it off, but as the final key in the sequence. On a remarkable number of televisions made after 2003, not just Sony, but many brands that license similar panel technology, this sequence either opens the service menu directly or opens a diagnostic screen that gives you access to the calibration settings. It doesn't work on every set, but it works on enough of them that one old Mennonite repairman in Holmes County used it for 15 years to fix televisions that families brought to him, televisions that the brand name service centers had told them were dead. He never charged more than $40. He kept families from spending $800 on a new set when the old one had nothing wrong with it except a factory setting that had drifted out of range. He learned that sequence from a Sony technician who came to his door in 2004 trying to sell him a satellite dish. The technician didn't make the sale, but he left behind something far more valuable. That's how this knowledge travels. One man to another, one door to another, never on a billboard, never in a commercial, never on the news. You just got it. The television in your living room is not what they told you it was. It is a machine you can understand, a machine you can adjust, a machine you can keep alive for another decade with nothing more than the remote already in your hand and the willingness to push a few buttons in the right order. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do next. Try that sequence on your TV tonight. And when you find the service menu, when you see the backlight current set absurdly high, when you see the operational hours counter ticking toward a number the manufacturer chose for you, come back here and tell me what brand and model you have and what number was waiting for you on that hours counter. Leave it in the comments. I read them. Subscribe if you want to be part of the small group of people who are quietly taking back the machines, the homes, and the systems that someone else decided we were too simple to operate ourselves. The next video covers a hidden setting in your refrigerator's control board, a single dial behind the kick plate that the appliance company hopes you'll never find, and what it does to your electric bill when you turn it just one notch. I'll see you there. But before you go, before you click away to try that sequence on your own set, I want to give you the rest of what I know, because what I told you so far is only the entry point. The service menu is the door. What lies behind it is a landscape that most owners will never walk through, and the longer you understand it, the more you realize how deliberate the whole arrangement has been. Let me take you back to 1996. That was the year Sony engineers in their Tokyo design labs filed an internal memo, one that surfaced years later in a deposition tied to a class action over premature plasma failures. The memo described what they called the service life curve, a mathematical model of how a display ages under different drive currents. The engineers had discovered something inconvenient. If they ran their panels at 60% of maximum brightness, the displays would last roughly 25,000 hours before noticeable degradation. If they ran them at 85%, that number dropped to about 12,000. And if they pushed them to 95%, which is roughly where most factory presets land, the panels would begin to show measurable wear at around 7,000 hours of use. 7,000 hours sounds like a lot until you do the math. The average American household runs a television about 5 hours a day. 7,000 hours is just under 4 years. 4 years from the moment you take it out of the box. That number is not an accident. That number is a product. It was chosen, refined, and protected by people whose job it was to balance two competing pressures: the desire to sell you a television that lasted long enough that you would not feel cheated, and the desire to sell you another television before you forgot the brand name on the bezel. 4 years is the sweet spot. 4 years is the window in which you still remember the experience as positive, but the screen begins to dim, the colors begin to drift, and you start telling yourself it might be time for an upgrade. The service menu lets you walk back into that calculation and rewrite it for yourself. The backlight current setting, often labeled IBL or LD or simply BL current depending on the manufacturer, is the single most important value in the entire menu. Lower it by 10% and you may not even notice a visible difference in a normally lit room, but you have just bought yourself thousands of additional hours of panel life. Lower it by 20% and you have, in real terms, doubled the expected service life of the display. The math is not subtle, the math is brutal in how clearly it favors you. I want to name some specific values now, because vague advice is what protects manufacturers. On many Samsung models from the 2018 through 2022 production years, the backlight current default sits between 220 and 240. The panels themselves are rated comfortably up to that level, but they perform beautifully and far longer at values around 160 to 180. On LG OLED models, the equivalent setting is often labeled OLED Light, or in the service menu, Peak Luminance. and the default is frequently set to 100 when the panel begins to show pixel wear noticeably faster above 80. On Sony Bravia sets, particularly the X900 and A80 series, there is a value called panel drive, or sometimes simply VCOM, that, when adjusted carefully downward by even a few units, can reduce the heat the panel generates by a measurable amount, and heat is the silent killer of every flat panel television ever built. Heat. Let me sit on that word for a moment, because if you take only one thing away from this entire video, let it be the understanding that heat is what kills your television. Not age, not dust, not the number of times you turned it on and off. Heat, the same heat that warps the capacitors on the power supply board, the same heat that dries out the thermal compound under the main processor, the same heat that causes the polarizing film on the LCD panel to delaminate at the edges, producing those creeping yellow or purple stains that owners describe as clouding, and that no repair shop will touch because the cost of replacement exceeds the value of the set. Every adjustment I am describing reduces heat. Lower backlight current, less heat. Lower contrast pump, less heat. Disabled local dimming aggression, less heat. The service menu is, in many ways, a temperature control panel disguised as a calibration tool. And the manufacturer set every one of those values to maximize the visual impression on a showroom floor under harsh fluorescent lighting, not to keep your television healthy in your dim living room at 9 in the evening. There is a man named Raymond Sonera who has spent the better part of 3 decades publishing detailed measurements of consumer displays through a company he founded called DisplayMate Technologies. Sonera is one of the few independent voices in this industry, and his reports have consistently shown that the factory settings on virtually every consumer television sold in the United States are calibrated to draw the eye on a showroom floor, not to render content accurately or to preserve the lifespan of the panel. In a 2014 report, he noted that the average out-of-box color temperature on consumer sets ran somewhere between 9,000 and 12,000 Kelvin, where the broadcast and cinema standard is 6,500 Kelvin. That bluish, overbright presentation is not an accident either. It is what makes a television look brighter and more vivid under the harsh overhead lights of a Best Buy or a Costco, and it is what makes the competing brand on the next shelf look dull by comparison. Once you bring the set home, that calibration is wrong for every single thing you will ever watch on it, and yet the service menu is the only place you can fully correct it. Inside the service menu, you will often find a section labeled WB or white balance, and within that section there are values for red gain, green gain, blue gain, red offset, green offset, and blue offset. These values are the ones the manufacturer used to push the picture cool and blue. By bringing the blue gain down by 20 or 30 units and the red gain up by 10, you can pull the white point back towards 6,500 Kelvin, where skin tones look human again, and where the LED backlight does not have to drive the blue diodes nearly as hard. Those blue diodes, incidentally, are the ones that fail first. They degrade faster than the red and green emitters because they operate at a higher energy state. And every hour you spend watching content with the white balance shoved toward 11,000 Kelvin is an hour you are accelerating the death of the blue channel specifically. When people complain years later that their old television looks yellow or warm or washed out, what they are usually describing is the natural consequence of the blue subpixels failing first, because the factory drove them harder than the others from day one. I want to tell you about another piece of history that almost nobody talks about. In 1924, in Geneva, Switzerland, representatives from the world's largest electric lamp manufacturers, Osram from Germany, Philips from the Netherlands, General Electric from the United States, and several others met privately and formed what came to be known as the Phoebus Cartel. The agreement they signed had one explicit purpose. Light bulbs at the time routinely lasted 2,500 hours or more. The cartel agreed that any member manufacturer who produced a bulb lasting longer than 1,000 hours would be fined. They engineered, deliberately and collectively, a reduction in the lifespan of their own product so that they could sell more units. This is not a conspiracy theory. The documents survived. Historians have published them, The Phoebus cartel is the textbook origin of the term planned obsolescence, and it is the moment in industrial history when manufacturers learned that the lifespan of a product could itself be a feature, calibrated and tuned like any other specification. The television industry inherited that lesson. It did not invent it, but it inherited it, and in many ways it has refined it further than the lighting industry ever did. Because a light bulb that dies is obvious. You see the failure, you replace it. But a television that slowly dims, slowly loses contrast, slowly drifts in color over the course of 3 or 4 years, that is a death you cannot perceive in any single moment. You only notice it when a friend brings over a new set, or when you walk into a store and see what current models look like, and you tell yourself it must be time for an upgrade. The slow death is the perfect death from a commercial standpoint. It produces no warranty claims, no angry phone calls, no class action lawsuits. It produces only quiet, regular, repeat customers. Now here is something the average viewer does not know. The operational hours counter that I mentioned earlier, the one buried in the service menu, often labeled usage time or panel on time, or in some Sony models simply T1, T2, T3 for different functional groups. That counter is not just a piece of trivia. On many modern smart televisions, particularly those manufactured after 2019, that counter is read remotely by the manufacturer's servers every time your set connects to the internet. The hours your panel has accumulated are part of a data profile that the manufacturer compiles on your household. They know how much you watch. They know what time of day you watch. They know how bright you keep the screen. And on some platforms, particularly Roku-based and Google TV-based smart sets, that data is shared with third parties for the purposes of targeted advertising and predictive replacement modeling. Predictive replacement modeling, that is the actual term used inside the industry. They predict, based on your usage patterns, the month and year in which you are most likely to purchase a new television. And then they sell that prediction to retailers who time their email promotions and direct mail campaigns accordingly. If that sounds paranoid, I would encourage you to read the privacy disclosures that came with your set. Read them slowly. The information is there, written in the kind of legal language that nobody reads precisely because nobody reads it. The settlement that Vizio reached with the Federal Trade Commission in February of 2017, in which the company agreed to pay $2.2 million for collecting viewing data on 11 million of its televisions without proper consent, was not an isolated incident. It was the first public acknowledgement of a practice that had been standard across the industry for years. Vizio simply got caught first because their data sharing was the most aggressive and the least disclosed. The service menu, among its other uses, lets you find and in some cases disable the telemetry that reports back to the manufacturer. On many Samsung sets, there is a section labeled SVC, or sometimes engineering, that contains a submenu for ACR, which stands for Automatic Content Recognition. ACR is the technology that captures small fingerprints of whatever is on your screen, including content from sources the manufacturer did not provide, like the cable box or the gaming console you connected by HDMI, and transmits those fingerprints to a server that identifies what you are watching. It is, in functional terms, a microphone for your eyeballs, and the toggle to disable it is often hidden 2 or 3 menu layers deeper than any user-accessible setting. I want to be careful here because I am not telling you to vandalize your television. The service menu is powerful precisely because it allows changes that the regular menu does not. There are settings in there that, if adjusted incorrectly, can render a panel inoperable. The values for EEPROM addressing, for sub-pixel timing, for the panel handshake protocols between the T-Con board and the main board, these are not settings to experiment with casually. If you are not certain what a value does, leave it alone. Write down what it was before you touched it. Use your phone to photograph the screen before you change anything. The discipline of documentation is what separates the people who successfully extend the life of their set from the people who turn an aging television into a paperweight. The community of people who do this work has grown quietly over the last decade. There are forums, some of them more than 15 years old, where users post detailed service menu maps for specific models. The AVS forum in particular has threads going back to the early 2000s where owners of specific Panasonic plasma sets, for example, documented the exact menu paths and value ranges that allowed those plasmas to outlive their factory-rated lifespan by margins of 2 and 3 times. There are users on that forum who are still running plasma sets from 2008 and 2009, sets that the manufacturer's accelerated wear modeling expected to be in landfills by 2014. Those sets are still producing beautiful images because their owners walked into the service menu, lowered the cell drive voltage, reduced the panel current, and adjusted the orbit shift parameters to prevent burn-in. None of those adjustments were available to the ordinary user. All of them were available to anyone willing to learn the codes. There is a name that comes up often in those forum threads, Robert Heron. He was a display calibrator who passed away in 2013, and during his life he produced some of the most thorough documentation of consumer television behavior that has ever been compiled. He was not a conspiracy theorist. He was a working professional who calibrated thousands of sets for paying clients and who documented in painstaking detail just how far the factory presets diverged from anything resembling accurate or sustainable operation. His work is still cited by professional calibrators today, and one of his central observations was this: the gap between what a television can do and what it does out of the box is enormous, and almost all of that gap exists for commercial reasons rather than technical ones. Now let me tell you about a specific number that I find revealing. The Energy Star certification program, which is administered jointly by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy, tests televisions in a specific factory default state and reports the energy consumption based on that state. But many manufacturers ship their televisions with what they call a demo mode or showroom mode enabled by default, and that mode draws significantly more power than the Energy Star certified mode. The certification is technically accurate, but the experience the customer has out of the box is not the experience that was certified. Investigators at the National Resources Defense Council documented in a 2016 report that the average smart television consumed about 25% more electricity than its Energy Star rating suggested, simply because the as-shipped configuration was not the configuration tested. That additional electricity is not free. Across all the televisions sold in the United States in a given year, it represents roughly 1.5 billion kilowatt hours of extra power consumption, enough to power approximately 140,000 average American homes for a full year. All of that, every watt of it, is paid for by you, the consumer, and none of it provides any meaningful improvement to the picture you actually watch. The service menu lets you correct that as well. Many sets have a value labeled power limit or sometimes backlight limit or max brightness that caps the maximum draw of the LED array. Reducing that limit by even 15 or 20% typically produces no visible difference in any content with normally graded brightness, but it can shave 30 to 40 watts off your set's peak consumption. Over the course of a year, on a television running 5 hours a day, that is somewhere between $50 and $90 saved on your electric bill, depending on where you live and what your utility charges per kilowatt hour. In states like California or Massachusetts, where electricity runs above 25 cents per kilowatt hour, the savings can exceed $100 annually from a single television. I do not know how to make that number sound urgent enough. $100 a year. Over the 10-year service life that your set is now capable of, that is $1,000 from one adjustment in a menu the manufacturer hid from you on purpose. There is one more category of settings I want to describe before I let you go, the ones that govern motion processing. Every modern television comes equipped with a feature variously called Motion Plus, True Motion, Motion Flow, Action Smoothing, or one of a dozen other branded names, all of which describe the same underlying technology: frame interpolation. The television generates artificial intermediate frames between the actual frames and the source content, producing the so-called soap opera effect that makes movies look like daytime television. Almost every professional filmmaker has publicly opposed this feature. Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie released a video in 2018 specifically asking viewers to disable it. Martin Scorsese, Reed Morano, Ryan Johnson, they have all spoken about it. The feature destroys the cinematic feel that the directors work to create. But the user-accessible menu often does not fully disable frame interpolation. It only reduces it. The full disable with the actual frame buffers cleared and the interpolation processor put to sleep is frequently only available through the service menu. And turning off that processor has a secondary benefit, which is that the main system on chip in your television runs significantly cooler when it is not constantly generating artificial frames. Cooler chip, longer service life, lower power draw, everything connects. Every setting in that hidden menu is part of the same larger system, and that system was tuned to maximize the manufacturer's commercial interest at the expense of yours. So when you find your way in tonight, and I hope you do go slowly, photograph everything before you change it, lower the backlight current first, look at the white balance values second, find the operational hours counter, and write down the number, because I want to read it in the comments. Find the ACR toggle and consider what you want to do with it. Find the motion processing settings and turn them off properly. And remember that everything I described to you is reversible. None of these adjustments are destructive in themselves. The destructive choices were the ones the manufacturer made before they shipped the set to you, and what you are doing now is undoing them. The television in your living room can serve you for another 10 years if you let it. It can stop reporting on you. It can stop costing you $100 a year in unnecessary electricity. It can stop driving its own components toward an early grave. All of that is within your reach, and the only thing standing between you and it is a sequence of buttons on the remote you already own. I want to thank you for staying with me through all of this. I know it has been a long video. I know the pace has been deliberate, but this is not the kind of information that benefits from being rushed, and the people who hid it from you were counting on the assumption that nobody would ever sit through a careful explanation of how their own television actually works. You just did. You are no longer part of that assumption. You are something else now. Try the sequence tonight, leave the brand, the model, and the hours counter number in the comments. Subscribe if you want the refrigerator video next week, because the dial behind the kick plate is going to surprise you in exactly the same way the service menu just did. And once you understand what that dial controls, you are going to look at every appliance in your house differently for the rest of your life. I will see you there.